Welcome back to Building Your Worldview episode 3. Today's topic is why humans are wired this way. Let me start with 2 questions. First, do you think you really understand human nature? And second, what do you think determines human nature? If you don't have an answer yet, that's completely fine. Because today, we're going to explore both questions through the lens of evolution and rethink what human nature really is. But today, we're not talking about Darwin. Instead, we are talking about Richard Dawkins and his groundbreaking book, The Selfish Gene. For nearly 15 years since its publication, this book has remained one of the most influential works in evolutionary biology. Understanding it doesn't just give us a completely new perspective on who we are. It also helps us see through human nature and navigate life with greater clarity. Today's video is divided into 3 parts. 1. Where do humans come from? 2. The true essence of human nature. And 3. How can we rise above it? So, let's get straight to the point. The core idea of this book can be summed up in one sentence. The gene, not the individual, is the ultimate unit of evolution, and humans are survival machines built by genes. So, where did humans come from? From this perspective, we evolved as vehicles designed to help genes survive. In the last episode, we talked about how the universe was born roughly 13.8 billion years ago. About 9 billion years after that, Earth formed through a remarkable chain of events. But at that point, there was still no life, only simple chemical ingredients. Many biologists and chemists believe that life began in what's known as primordial soup, the ancient oceans around 3 to 4 billion years ago. That primordial soup was filled with chemical compounds and small organic molecules. Now, imagine this enormous chemical soup. Everything's just floating around. Molecules keep bumping into one another, combining, breaking apart, and recombining. Then, purely by chance, our oldest ancestor appeared. It didn't look like much, but it had one extraordinary ability. It could make copies of itself. Dawkins called it a replicator. Don't worry too much about how it replicated. The important part is simply that it could. You can picture it as a long chain made up of smaller building blocks. Whenever one of those building blocks encounters similar ones nearby, it would attract them and assemble another copy of itself. Of course, replication has one unavoidable downside. The more copies you make, the more mistakes you make. And those mistakes are what we call mutations. Maybe the original sequence was A to B. A copying error turns it into A to C or A to D. As mutations accumulated, different kinds of replicators began to appear. But there was one problem. The primordial soup had limited resources, which meant competition was inevitable. If we both need the same building blocks, then we're competing for the same materials. So the cycle became simple. Compete, replicate, make mistakes, repeat. Then one day, a tiny replicator stumbled upon an incredible new trick. It evolved the ability to break apart other replicators and steal their building blocks for itself. Suddenly, it had a huge advantage. But evolution never stands still. If you can change, so can everyone else. Then another replicator evolved something entirely different. It surrounded itself with a layer of protein, protecting its precious building blocks from being destroyed. And so, the evolutionary arms race began. You adapt, I adapt. You compete, I compete. Meanwhile, the environment keeps changing too. Replication never stops, mutations never stop, and natural selection never stops. Over countless generations, more and more efficient survival machines gradually emerged. Machines that helped replicators survive and reproduce even better. Then, in what feels like a blink of an eye, 4 billion years passed. So what happened to those ancient little replicators? They didn't disappear, and they didn't remain drifting aimlessly in the ocean. Instead, they gathered together and settled inside something much larger, far more sophisticated, and far more powerful. A new kind of survival machine. Through incredibly long and winding evolutionary pathways, they continued competing for resources and making more copies of themselves. That machine is us. Today, we call those tiny replicators genes, and we are their survival machines. They built us, and preserving them is, in evolutionary terms, the ultimate reason we exist. So, if you occasionally notice selfish thoughts or darker impulses, don't immediately attack yourself for having them. They are a perfectly normal part of being human. Because a gene that was completely selfless would have been very unlikely to survive long enough to reach us. But here's what seems like a contradiction. If we are truly that selfish, why do human societies contain so much cooperation, kindness, altruism, and even self-sacrifice? That brings us to the second part of today's video. What is the true essence of human nature? Before we dive in, though, let me make one important point. No matter how famous a book is or how rigorous a scientific theory appears, it still only the best explanation we currently have. One that most experts accept because it hasn't yet been disproven. That doesn't mean it's the absolute truth. So, never forget the importance of critical thinking. Alright, let's get back to it. At its core, human nature is simply an expression of our genes. Genes don't understand concepts like selfish or selfless. They have only one objective: to make as many copies of themselves as possible and for as long as possible. When pure selflessness is no longer the best way to achieve that goal, genes begin programming behaviors like cooperation and altruism instead. What looks like self-sacrifice is often the strategy with the highest long-term return. We can break this down into two categories: kin relationships and non-kin relationships. Why do we naturally care so much about our closest relatives? Why are family members often willing to sacrifice so much for one another? Because we share genes. We share roughly 50% of our genes with our parents, children, and siblings. We share about 55% with our grandparents, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews. From a gene's perspective, sacrificing yourself to save 2 siblings or 4 nieces or nephews is genetically equivalent to saving yourself. It might even be a better investment. But genes have, through evolution, built an incredibly sophisticated system that favors those who share the greatest portion of their DNA. Favoring family is simply one of the most direct ways genes promote altruism. But the program is even more complex than that. Take this for example. Your parents and your children each share about 50% of your genes. So why do people often seem even more devoted to their children? Because children represent the future. They have longer lives ahead of them and greater reproductive potential. From the perspective of genes, they carry more opportunities for future. Now, what about people who aren't related to us? If we share almost no genes with them, why cooperate at all? Why not simply compete for resources and maximize our survival? Because remember, if you want to take from someone else, they probably want to take from you too. Constant conflict is incredibly expensive. Genes don't want endless war. They want the lowest cost strategy that produces the highest chance of long-term replication. And that's exactly why cooperation also evolves between unrelated individuals. But this kind of cooperation isn't unconditional. As long as selfish genes exist, betrayal will always remain a possibility. So, evolution favors something else, a strategy that's stable over the long run. This is where Dawkins introduced Robert Trevor's idea of reciprocal altruism. The basic idea is this. After countless evolutionary games played over millions of years, the strategy that consistently benefits both sides isn't blind generosity, it's reciprocity. In the long run, helping those who can help you creates the greatest net benefit for everyone involved. But reciprocal altruism only works if 4 conditions are met. First, repeated interactions. If both people know they will only meet once, then betrayal often becomes the rational strategy. Second, the ability to recognize individuals. You need to remember who helped you and who betrayed you. Third, the ability to weigh costs and benefits. Both sides need to feel that what they are giving up is worth less than what they will gain. In other words, both people have to believe they are winning. And fourth, the ability to detect and punish cheaters. Whether as an individual or as a group, those who constantly accept help without ever giving anything back have to face consequences. Being excluded, losing trust, or simply no longer receiving help. Travers even took this idea one step further. He suggested that many of the emotions we think of as moral may have evolved to support reciprocal altruism. For example, gratitude and guilt encourage us to return favors, so we don't earn the reputation of being a freeloader. Friendship and trust may exist for the same reason. That is to help us build long-term relationships with reliable partners. At this point, you might start feeling a little uneasy. Does this mean everything we value, a mother's love, friendship, even morality, is nothing more than an illusion created by our genes? Don't fall into nihilism. That's exactly what I don't want you to do. Because now we arrive at the third and final part of our video. How do we rise above human nature? Remember what we talked about in the last episode? Humans are the only known species in the universe capable of reflecting on our own existence. Never focus so much on how small you are that you forget how extraordinary that is. The moment we can step outside the perspective of our genes and see the world from the perspectives of ourselves, the moment we can observe these instincts instead of simply obeying them, we gain something incredibly powerful: choice. So how do we actually take back that choice? The first step is to develop a metacognitive mindset. Become the master of your instincts. So, what exactly is metacognition? In one sentence, it's thinking about your thinking. Being aware of how your own mind works. It helps us overcome our primitive impulses. Once we understand that humans evolved as survival machines for genes, something changes. From that point on, whenever we experience uncomfortable emotions, anger, anxiety, sadness, or fear, we can pause before reacting. Instead of immediately identifying with those feelings, we can step back and observe them. Ask yourself, is this really me, or is it just an ancient survival program running in my brain? For example, imagine you are disagreeing with your team at work. Your first instinct might be to feel nervous and want to back down. But that's when you remind yourself, this may just be an outdated piece of evolutionary software. Back in tribal societies, being rejected by your group could literally mean death. So, our fear of conflict becomes deeply wired into us. But today, we live in a very different world. Expressing your ideas and standing up for yourself when done respectfully often earns you more trust and respect, not less. Once you recognize that instinct for what it is, you can still move forward even while feeling afraid. Number 2, metacognition helps us become better at cooperation and altruism. The next time someone helps you, you won't simply think, wow, they're such a nice person, nor will you immediately wonder, what's the catch? Instead, you will understand the interaction through the lens of reciprocal altruism and evolutionary stable strategies. You will recognize that long-term cooperation benefits both sides, not just emotionally, but evolutionarily. That understanding makes it easier to accept help without guilt. And it also makes you more willing to help others first, because you appreciate the value of building strong networks based on mutual support. Number 3, metacognition changes the way we deal with conflict and selfish behavior. When someone hurts your interests, you won't be consumed by anger anymore or feel that you've suddenly lost faith in humanity. Instead, you will recognize what's happening. You are witnessing another person's selfish genes expressing themselves under a particular set of circumstances. That awareness creates emotional distance. Instead of asking, why are they such a terrible person? You begin asking, is this still someone I should cooperate with? And if the answer is yes, then the next question becomes, How can I change the structure of this interaction so cooperation works better? Your response shifts from moral outrage to strategic thinking. Okay, we've covered the first step to take back control is developing a metacognitive mindset. The second step is to choose the means that reproduce through you. In The Selfish Gene, Dawkins introduced another revolutionary idea. He argued that culture has its own version of genes. He called them memes. Ideas, beliefs, points, songs, values, stories. Like genes, they replicate by moving from one mind to another. They spread rapidly, and some of them can survive for centuries. This is one of the greatest things that make humans unique. We don't just pass on biological genes. We can also create cultural ones. We can't rely on reproduction to make us immortal, but if you contribute something meaningful to human civilization, that contribution can outlive you by generations. Almost no one cares whether Socrates still has living biological descendants, but thousands of years later, people who feel lost, confused, or uncertain about their future still find guidance in his ideas. That's the kind of immorality culture makes possible. So pay attention to what you are feeding your mind every day, because eventually you become what you repeatedly consume. Stay away from harmful memes, the ones that manufacture anxiety, fuel hatred, or profit from division. Instead, carefully choose the ideas you allow into your mind. Better yet, create ideas worth passing on yourself, because every meme you adopt or create is helping shape the person you will become. Alright, that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching. I'm Yu. Follow me for more to live up your mind.